yours, Chris. Go for it.
All right, so is it a good time to use the washroom now? All right, let me just share my screen now. Okay. Alrighty. All right, so let's start from the beginning. Start presenting. Cool. All right, building websites for the visually impaired. Change the title. Sorry, Sean. So the inspiration for this. So part of the reason I wanted to do this specific topic for my talk was when I started like learning React, I noticed there was like a lot of code that like it looked off, and like it didn't look like the normal HTML that you see in a lot of web pages. It wasn't formatted properly. And it just kind of looked out of place. I don't know if this is, I think it's mostly because a lot of developers are skipping kind of HTML these days and going towards React and not really learning good HTML. But either way, I saw there was a need to like talk about this. Moving on. So let's start at the beginning. What is web accessibility? So in general, the term refers to like making websites that are accessible to everyone. It doesn't necessarily mean just for people with like disabilities. It means people with slow internet connections, people with, trying to think of other groups. But in general, it's a term for anybody to be able to use a website. But today, what I'm going to be using that term for, and what it is mostly online that you see, is that web accessibility is about enabling people with disabilities to use websites so that everybody has the same kind of experience, or an equitable experience. All right, so moving on. So I just want to talk about some of the symptoms of disabilities that a lot of people using the web have, and some of the things that we need to consider when we're designing websites. So on the first column here, the first set of symptoms is poor vision, partial blindness, and color blindness. So I think everybody has somebody in their life that has poor vision, old people in particular. Your vision gets bad as you age. So keeping that in mind is very important. That's why we talk about having a high contrast ratio on our designs. Really important for people who have trouble distinguishing that, as well as color blindness, which, quick side note on that, color blindness affects about 1 in 10 guys. For girls, I think it's only like 1 in 200, I want to say. It's like a very, very small number. And that's because the gene that's responsible for causing color blindness is on the Y chromosome. So girls have 2 X's, so they don't really get that, but they still can. So moving on, there is epilepsy and blindness. Now, most people know epilepsy, I believe anyways, where if you have any flashing lights or sudden movements on the screen, it can cause epileptic seizures in some people, which ideally, well, it isn't ideal. And on the other end of the severe spectrum is blindness as well, total blindness. And we're going to be talking a bit more about that later. So on the next column, we got partial paralysis and reduced range of motion. There's a lot of people who are wheelchair bound. Maybe they're not completely paralyzed. They still have a lot of range of motion, but they can't use their mouse usually. That's usually the first thing that you see is most people who have some sort of reduced range of motion, they're not able to use their mouse. So they either rely completely on their keyboards, or they have some sort of adaptive device that plugs into the computer that sort of acts like a keyboard. So we also have paralysis and amputees, and that the same thing goes for them. They're usually using special devices to interact with the computer. The cognitive side, I'm not going to talk about that too much because it is important to know that it's there. But I'm going to be honest, I can't. I don't think I'm the best to speak about this. I know that using good design is important, so that people who have difficulty with information retention, memory issues, that they're able to navigate properly throughout the website and get the information that they need. But again, I'm gonna skip most of that for today. And then on the very end, it is hearing, which is so partial hearing loss or complete hearing loss, which of course is deafness. All right, so moving on. Now that we know what types of disabilities there are, how do we actually account for these? All right, so for cognitive disabilities, as I mentioned before, in general, just using good design principles will get you about 99% of the way there. Using a logical layout so that people can traverse your web page easily is probably the most important thing. Having proper contrast so you're not like straining your eyes to really get to the information, and intuitive form controls, which is hugely important. But again, this is just good design principles. Moving on, designing for hearing disabilities. It's not that hard actually. I was trying to come up with more scenarios where we'd have to work for this, but in general on the web, there's not much audio and video that we're playing with. It's not like a video game where we're responsible for that. So one thing we can do is make sure that any video or media that we have on our sites has subtitles, just so that it is still accessible. But most of the time that does fall on whoever is providing the content. All right, moving on, designing for motor impairment. So this is where it gets a bit trickier. There's three things that you can do to help your sites be more keyboard accessible. So one of them is making sure that anything that needs to be interacted with on your page has an attribute, or you use HTML elements to get this attribute. It's called tab index. What tab index does is it allows your the element with that attribute on it to be tabbed. Like if you tab through any page, you'll see that all the links have a tab index, all the buttons have a tab index, and all the form elements have a tab index. So if you're making any custom elements or anything like that, you want to make sure any interactable elements have a tab index on them. Another thing that's super important is when it comes to menus, having your menus accessible with arrows, like the arrow keys, is really important. When you're actually using just the keyboard, I've done it myself, and you have a huge like menu with like multiple levels in it, you need to be able to use the keys to navigate with it. It's way too hard to flip through every single item in the menu before you get to the third or fourth nesting in there. And the last thing is just implementing shortcuts on your web app with conventional keys. This I don't think I need to speak more about. It's just don't make it complicated for the user, honestly. It's just another one of those things that go into good design. All right, so this is the big one, designing for vision impairments. So it's hard to say the least. This one is different than each of the other ones, not just because I'm talking about it today specifically, but also because the way we design it as people with sight is almost entirely around sight, if that makes sense. Everything that we do, from like the content that we put on there and how we're styling it to how we're making it function, it's all about how it looks, not so much the structure of it. And when it comes to making websites for people who don't have vision, like doing proper, or how should I put it, structuring the document properly and categorizing data that you have on your site is the most important thing. And that's why I talked earlier about we're going to be diving into HTML, because almost all accessibility that you're going to be doing, accessibility design, is done in HTML, because that's where the content is. All right, so I'm going to start skipping through this a bit just so we can get on a bit quicker, but in general, designing for low vision disabilities, have visual contrast, never use just color for conveying information. So that touches on the color blindness thing. If you have an element like an icon that's showing if you're online or not, it can't just be conveying information just by color, because there's a lot of people, 1 in 10 men, who cannot see that properly and may miss that information, which is not what you want to do. So one thing that you can do, like they did here, this is Discord. One thing that they did was they have different icons for each one of the states. They do use colors to convey some information, but you can still, even if you can't see like the difference between red and green, you're still able to make out what this is. And the last thing is ensure your site can be zoomed properly. This is something that not a lot of people consider, but for a lot of older people, they can't really see the site at the normal like zoom level at 100%. So what they'll do is they'll hit Control plus or Control minus and zoom it in. Now, I'd say most sites, people do not design for this. They don't actually test this out. And it is super, super important, because if somebody can't zoom your site and like if they do, the text goes off the screen, they can't use it, well, they're going to go to a different site. All right, and so designing for blind individuals. So as I said before, categorizing your data, and actually every piece of your data is super, super important. We've learned different HTML elements throughout our course, like as you can see here, actually the header tag. We've learned that that's for our header, like where we put logo and our nav bar, the nav element where we actually have our navigation. The article element, I don't think we've talked about, which is just for a standalone body of content. The figure element, which is if you want to have an image and a caption together, it's ideal to use the figure element. And then the footer, we've already talked about that. So using HTML is just how you design semantic pages. So two of the other things that you should do is, well, actually, these are the same thing, is test your site. Test it. I'm going to show you a couple ways that you're able to test your site, but it really is important that you try and test your site as closely as possible to the people who are going to be using it. Now, I'm not saying put on a blindfold and use your website, but learning how to use a screen reader, and also another technique that's used very often is disabling CSS, actually. Because disabling CSS will reveal just the structure of your HTML document. That's actually a really good way to look over and navigate through your site like somebody would if they're blind or have some sort of vision impairment. So yeah, test your site. That's the big one. All right. So originally I was going to do the screen reader first, and we would be jumping into that. But I think I want to go over some just some HTML and stuff. So I think we're going to pop into our code editors now. Sean, you mentioned that the get the files is up there.
Yeah, it's good to go and it's live, so everybody should be able to click on it. I think you only had 2 files in there. Is that right, Chris?
Yes. Yep. So I got 2 files here. Let me just delete these. So I have 4 files here. You guys should just have 2. One index.html, and I think there's a text file in there. You don't need the text file for now. It's that's just for links for later. But if you want to open up the index.html, excuse me, in VS Code, we can start just kind of going through this. Originally, I was just gonna start typing and just show you guys, but I don't. Some people like to follow along, so I thought I'd give them that option. So this is just. I'm actually gonna give you guys a second to get going. One second here. All right. Actually, I don't want to just keep moving. I'm gonna put this on my other screen. How are we doing, guys? Does everybody get the files? Is that the consensus? Okay, cool. Evan and Seamus are nodding, so we're good. All right, so as you'll see in this file, I hope I gave you the right file. We got a couple of markers, and I'm just going to go through and kind of give you a good idea of how to structure this kind of content that presents in this website. And this is just based off of my knowledge to date of what I'm pretty sure is a good good structure for this website. All right. All right, so the first thing here is we have a sidebar here. This template that I grabbed, luckily, does a lot of like useful names for the IDs and the classes. So we can tell that this is a sidebar. And if you scroll down here, we got our main tag here, or our main content. So one of the things we can do to kind of separate any kind of content that's not our main content is we can throw it into an aside element. Now the aside element is actually exactly what it kind of hints towards. It's used for content that's not pertaining to the main content. So that could be like a sidebar, it could be a toolbar with ads in it or something, anything that's like besides the main content that won't be in like the same container as the main content. So we're going to put that in here. What do we have here? So site title. So titles, as we know, they're supposed to use H1 tags. H1 tags, H2, whatever. This is the site title, so we're going to use the H1 because we start at the lower end. So I'm actually going to change this to H1. All right, moving down here, we have a list of links. Now, a list of links can otherwise be known as a navbar. This is exactly what that is. So instead of having it wrapped in a div, which I mean, they can still tell that like the links are there. We're going to try and put this in a nav element so that when somebody with a screen reader is going over this, if they want to skip to any kind of navigation, like if you have an index page, they can easily find that with a click of a button. All right, so the next section here is Twitter. Now, one note here, and you're going to see it a lot in this template, is they use a lot of random H tags. And that makes sense because I found when I started learning HTML and CSS, it's like if you want something like a perfect size, you can just go, if you want it smaller, you can do like H4, H5, H6. It's really not a good idea to do that if you're just trying to style it that way. That's because people, when they're flipping through this, they're going to be looking at, oh, what's the main header? Okay, let's like sort by like the subheaders. So it's a good idea to use H tags in like an order. So going from H1 to H2 to H3 to H4. So because this isn't the site title, we're going to put this as an H2, and that should be good. All right, moving on, we got our main content, and there's actually a tag in HTML called the main tag. And yes, again, it's exactly what it sounds like. I'm just going to change the closing tag down here. So the main tag, it actually is, if I'm not mistaken, it is required by the HTML spec to have at least one main tag in the document. I think only one. I'm not sure how recent that spec is, but I did read that somewhere. So it is a good idea to have that just to specify that like where the extra content is and where like the meat and potatoes of the article is so that people can skip to it if they want to. So here again, we're coming to, this is not the actually you could classify this as the site title, but we're going to put this as an H2 now because we put the other one as the H1 as the main header to the document. Next, we're moving on to the image here. And does anybody, I'm actually going to do a good old question here. Does anybody see anything wrong with this image tag? I just want to like pick your brains. You can even shoot it in the chat. Say that again?
The alt tag is just nondescriptive of what's going on.
Seamus, you got 100%.
That's what I was going to say too. Yeah.
Yes, you also get 100%. So yes, the alt tag is the worst alt tag ever. The alt tag or the alt attribute is what is going to be read off to people who cannot see this, who are using a screen reader. If this says image, it's the least descriptive thing ever. So we're actually going to skip over to this. You guys don't have this image, sorry, but so this is, what is this? This is a beach at what it looks like sunset. So I'm literally just going to call it, okay, if I can spell, on the sunset on the beach. Not the most descriptive, but we got to give them at least an idea of what it is. Now, you ideally want to do this for every single image that you put on your site, especially if it's actually in like an article. But it's not always possible, especially when you're throwing in random images. But if at all possible, please include the alt element. It's super important to, well, share the content that you have on your website. So moving on, I'm just looking for these. So again, this one we're just going to change to an H2 because that's not our main site title. And there's not a lot of changes that we have to do here. They did actually a really good job on this, I think. And actually, if you can tell here, what I really like about this template is they actually use the block quote element. And this is a really nice way to cite quotes. Anytime you're quoting somebody, if it's like a paper or something like that, or part of an article, this is actually a very proper way to do it. And yeah, it's something that they actually did right. All right, moving on a bit. So I'm not going to go to the very end, but I'm going to do, I think I'll continue on this one. So we got our portfolio. We're going to change to H2s. And this is okay here. This isn't necessarily a navigation here. I don't believe, judging from the markup. So we don't have to make this a nav. I believe this is just a bunch of images. Yeah, this is just a bunch of images. Services. Okay, I'm going to skip here because there's one part that I really want to get to. This part, okay. This is one of the spots that I see in most websites that are, it's not completely inaccessible because this content is totally going to be read off. But it can be very confusing to a person to hear all of this read out at the same time. You will not know what the street name is, what the address is. So addresses can be really tricky for people when they're using screen readers. So I'm going to use Seamus's trick, and I'm going to just pull in some copied stuff because it's way too complicated for me to like sit here and do that for you. But I'm just going to show you what kind of the best way to do an address is, because more likely than not, you're going to have to put in an address somewhere. So I'm going to see if I can shrink this down a bit so you can... okay. Is that terribly hard to see? Okay. I'm gonna do that a bit better. Sort of. There we go. Okay, so just looking on here, I'm going to format it too so we can actually read it properly. So there's actually an address tag in HTML. Go figure. They thought about this. We have an element on an attribute here, which I actually just learned about 2 days ago. But you're actually able to give it instructions to not translate something if there is, like, on Chrome, how Chrome will like give you the option to translate a document if they see it's not in your preferred language. This tells the browser, don't translate this part. Because there might be words in an address or words in your name that actually mean something in a different language. So we don't want that. So what do we have here? We have a subheader, we have the address, and we have each line here. And actually the word breaks, as much as some people like to say that they're not supposed to be used in certain spots, I use them personally. For this instance, they're actually super helpful because each one of these should be broken down. This is one whole address and one whole paragraph, but it kind of needs to be broken up a little bit. So using those word breaks kind of gives like a pause to the screen reader, and it just makes it more digestible. This down here, super important as well. And actually, if you forget all of the elements that I taught you today, I want you to remember at least this one. This is called the description list. And what this is say you have, I gotta think about this. Well, actually, just this information right here, where you have a little title that says phone, and you have the information right beside it. This, if it's read out aloud, will not make much sense if it was just one paragraph. It'd be phone, colon, this. Having these two things separated, it kind of gives, it tells the person that, okay, here's going to be a bunch of key and value pairs, and just go down the list listing them. So you don't have to, like, you don't go into it thinking that it's going to be a paragraph, like a sentence being read off, and when you're actually just getting data told to you. That kind of makes sense. So how this element works is it's kind of like a list element where it's like you have to have like you have the outer element here, the description list as it's called, the DL, and then inside it you have these pairs of description title and description data. Just give me a second here. And yeah, so you have one stacked on top of each other. And yeah, it's a really good way to structure your data if you ever have like those key values, which if you're making like a dashboard, or you have, I think most web apps, if you have like, oh, status is online, that kind of stuff where you're not using natural language, this is a really good way to structure your data. So yeah, and what else did I do here? Oh yeah, and the last thing I'll touch on is making sure that there's links on any kind of data that's linkable, if that makes sense. So here they did link, sorry, this is the original. Here they did link to the email, but the phone number, they didn't link it there. It just kind of says phone, and then it's a random set of numbers, which as much as it does say phone before there, if somebody's like skipping through the document, they could just hear a number and not realize that it's a phone number at all. So putting it as a link up here using the with a colon there tells the browser and the screen reader that this is a number, and that they can call it immediately if they want to. All right, so that is the end of document. How fast did I go? Was that pretty fast? Now that we're done the code part of this, I think we're super good for time. We're gonna work with the screen reader stuff. So I am going to, what am I gonna do? Oh yeah, I think if you want to look in the document that I provided, I'm pretty sure I included the screen reader link. I could be completely wrong. It is there, Evan? Yes, I thought this through. I completely forget what I put in there now. But yeah, there should be the screen reader link. It's called NVDA. If you guys want to go to that link and download it, just a standard Windows download. And I think it's only 30 megs, so it shouldn't take long. I'm gonna let you do that, but also talk
Where's
a
that
little
link
bit.
exactly?
So on the get the files for my project, actually, you know what? I'm gonna just throw it in the chat too. Sorry for those who went there, but NVDA download. So NVDA is this, and you just go to download, and I'll throw it in the chat for the convenience. Yeah, and you just go down to here, and it's like, oh, do you want to make a donation? You of course support the people. Put $250 and then download. No. The last one that's automatically checked, it's skip the donation, download, and yeah, it's only 25 megs. So, I'm gonna check here if I actually got it installed. NVDA. Okay, cool. I don't have it installed, so I'm gonna install it with you guys. How exciting!
It really does start talking right away, eh?
Oh yeah. When that, like, I had it full blast, like the volume when I opened it up, and that scared the crap out of me. And I couldn't get out of it either, which made it even worse. So yeah, opening it here. As you can hear, super loud, super ominous. Don't know why they went with that, but okay, stop. There we go. Okay. So yeah, this is. I'm gonna stop moving everything. Can you guys hear my audio when it's like talking? Oh, okay, cool. That makes it more difficult, but whatever. I'm gonna wait here actually until everybody's made it to this screen. Is everybody at that screen? I'm gonna have to use you three for a. Oh, I'm actually really sorry. This is so difficult to do right now. One second. I gotta change this, guys. Sorry. This is screaming at me while you guys are talking. Or
This
not
is so
talking.
chaotic. I love it. Every time I move my mouse, it's like blah 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 blah.
Okay, I heard that.
Just don't move.
Okay, we're turning that down a bit. Okay, so one thing you're gonna notice immediately is that this thing starts talking to you. So screen readers are designed to work with keyboards primarily, but if you mouse over anything, it's gonna read it, and yeah, the voice is not that great actually, because this is a free product. But NVDA is actually I want to say it's the most used screen reader out of like all screen readers and out of all devices. On phones, there's a completely different market for screen readers. But on Windows desktop, excuse me, there's only two options. There's NVDA, which is free, and there's JAWS, which is not free. But it's actually super cool because the entire company at JAWS, actually, when I was doing research, I found this out. But JAWS, the company, they these guys, they are completely run by blind people. Like literally every single employee at that company is 100% blind. Which I don't know. I think that is pretty cool, honestly. Pretty cool office environment, and it guarantees they'll make a good product. And then so on Linux, there's like one option which is Orca, which I mean, just from the logo, it doesn't look good. But then also, Macs, actually, Mac OS, and I believe it's also on iOS. There's something called VoiceOver. And no, I checked this out because I know Sarah has a Mac, and I was talking with her about using that. And I did some research on it, and actually, it is probably one of the best products ever. It has like the best voice, the best usability, the best everything. So props to Apple for making something free for once. I mean, you still got to buy their laptops to use it, but you know. Anyways, we're gonna jump back to the screen reader. So, if you made it this far or you made it further, install NVDA on the computer. You not want to go like. I really hope you didn't check these items because if you check that one, NVDA is going to pop up every single time you sign in. I'm very sorry. And uncheck the desktop icon as well. It's probably going to not do that. So continue. Everything's going to go black because I'm going to hit the yes or no. And we're good. I'm going to turn this down again because it's getting. Show.
If you do want to share your the audio, you should be able to do that through Teams.
Oh, how?
I think from the share menu, I think there's a way to do it.
I've never done it myself. I just always relied on my microphone picking it up, but
wait, I'm gonna bring this into view. Tell me where to do this. How do I do it?
So if you might have to stop sharing your screen and then reshare it.
Okay.
And when you reshare it, there should be a toggle there to include computer sound or something like that.
Okay, 1 second. This is something that I didn't plan for, but I kid you not, every time I hover over an element, something's reading to me. So I got to stop that for a second. Okay, can you repeat what you just said, Michael?
Sure. When you actually go to share your screen again,
Okay.
where you're picking what you want to share, there should be a toggle there somewhere that says like include computer sound or something like that.
Oh, you just saved my presentation. 100%. Awesome. Okay, we're going to share the screen again with sound. Alrighty.
Volume mixer speakers, Realtek.
Y'all
No
hear that?
audio.
Yeah, now we can hear it.
Use Lighthouse metrics.
Cool.
6.
Um,
Volume closes the window.
okay.
Microsoft Teams call in progress
Alright,
meeting in
so
Classroom.
this
Document.
software honestly can be
Blank.
a little bit jarring when you first start to use it for obvious reasons. But we're gonna skip
To get
over
missing image description. Challenge details 1-3
to,
Google
that's
Web
the challenge.
Presentation notes Google Docs
We're
document.
just gonna skip over to a random website here. It's not
Space
so
select-
random because I picked it because it's a good website. But I'll post this in the
HT
chat. I
selected.
think it's in the
HT selected
the
instead.
text file as well that I provided. But I'll post it in chat for
Less-
convenience.
Lesson 1. Sending. Message.
And also, I should probably ask.
Clickable. Lesson 1-3.
This is so
Intro
hard
to
with
web
the voice in the
accessibility.
background.
38.
Is everybody at this point? This is your time to tell me if
lesson
you've
one.
run into problems with the installation. Everybody good? All right, Sean's nodding yes, so we're moving on. All right, so.
I'm just laughing at the commentary from the screen reader.
Oh my God, yeah. It is beyond overwhelming right now. Regardless,
Change
we'll get
or
through it
remove
together.
link. By it. Lesson 1-3. Intro
All right,
to
so.
gas and electricity tariffs.
So when you go to the page, it's going to start reading off some of the stuff. Now, the way the screen reader works is you can scroll through either the links, like the links, buttons, all that kind of interactable stuff, or you can go through the text. So to go through any links or buttons, navigation, all that kind of stuff, what we do is we use the tab button.
Calling, meeting, link privacy policy link
So you can't really
https
see it, but
//go.microsoft.com/fw link/p/link ID equals 857,875.
okay. So what that was just giving me was, I believe it was going into the navigation and showing me all of the like listed items and stuff. So you can flip through. What is it? Oh, I'm sorry, guys. I'm not sharing my screen. Am I sharing my screen? Oh.
By attending this meeting,
okay.
You consent to being included.
All right. Sorry. Okay. So yeah, so you can flip through all of the interactable items with your tab button. So we'll start reading off.
Recording and transcription have started. Maroshan.
And I'm
Gas.
on this.
Compare our
Oh, this
gas
is way
and
rougher than I
electricity
predicted
prices
in,
and tariffs SSE
recording.
Google Chrome. Compare our gas
I'm
and
just going to explain
electricity
it at
prices
this
and
point.
tariffs
This is getting
SSE.
very difficult.
Navigation landmark link graphic SSE
tab
energy
button?
search.
Chris, you might want to just disable the voiceover.
Yep, yeah, we're going to do
It's
that.
getting hard even just to
Start.
hear you.
Task. No.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys.
You're getting outstaged by
Hell.
the screen reader, right? It's,
Fiber.
It was way easier when it
Open.
was just me not talking
Page.
to anyone and doing this.
There you go. Perfect.
Perfect. Okay, so we're just going to talk about it. We're going to have a good old conversation, me and you, just like the good old days before I installed the software. Okay, so tab, as I said, you can go through all the interactable items. It will list off what type of element it is. So it'll be like, it'll tell you like, oh, button, renew your tariff, navigation, bundles, blah, 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 give you a bunch of information about this tab. Another way to navigate through it is to use your arrow keys. Specifically up and down are the most useful ones. And if you do that, that is going to go through your content. It'll only read off like one paragraph at a time. But if you hit insert and down, it will start reading the content and just not stop, which is, I guess, useful for some people. So that is honestly like the primary way to navigate through a screen reader. There are, one second here. There are like probably about 100 different commands. I'm actually looking at a document right now with all the commands, and all of them are more kind of advanced users, advanced features. But the gist of what you're going to need for this challenge is literally just being able to tab through stuff and being able to go through the content using up and down. So if you want, just play around with this for a second. And does anybody have any questions? I've used this before, so I don't know if this is too brief of an explanation, but those two commands will kind of get you through most of it, I believe. Anybody have any questions?
Is the hotkeys for like all screen readers the same? Because someone that would be blind would probably have troubles actually like navigating through all the keys if it changes throughout. So do you know if it just like it stays all the same?
Yeah, so from the best of my knowledge, most of them are the same. Like I think for voiceover it is up and down arrows as well, and tab stays the same for all of them, I know. There are some variations on like the how should I call it, the super user features. Like there's a button for like to skip like to toggle through each of the tables and stuff. That one's different between them. So there is some differences. It's kind of like code editors, honestly. It's like if you went from like Sublime Text or Atom to VS Code, most of the stuff is in the same spot. Like most of the stuff is in the same place, but you are going to have to take some time to get accustomed to it. But luckily, most people don't have to switch from screen reader to screen reader usually, with the exception of like you have a screen reader on your phone and a screen reader on your on your computer. But for most of it, they are shared key commands. So you really only have to like get good with it once, and you should be good with each one of them. I'm going to show you my face now because why not? So does anybody have any more questions about anything at all that I said? Because this is conversation period. This is Q&A. This is me getting to know you.
What is the
You go ahead, Sam.
what is the tab index that you were talking about earlier?
Tab index. So I'll just share my screen and just show you. The best way I can show you is just Mozilla Docs tab index. It's an attribute. It's an HTML attribute that you put on to elements. Now here's the thing. If you use the built-in elements that are already interactable, like input, button, like any elements in HTML that you already know you can interact with, it already has tab index. the reason I mentioned tab index is because some people, when they're building custom components or just a custom, I don't know, drop down or whatever, if you're building it yourself, you will not have tab index baked into it. So if ever you need to add a tab index, like you need something to be interactable and you need to put tab index in, you use this. You use a 0 and that just inserts it in. Like you just have to use 0, don't think about it. You can put an order, like specify, okay, like the first time I hit tab on this page, this element is going to come up. You can specify that with like 1, 2, 3, 4, but it's not suggested. It should just be 0, and you can tab through as the elements are listed in the page. Or likewise, actually, if you want to put something out of the tab ability, like you have, for some reason, you have like a form field that you don't want to be tabbable, you can put -1 in there, and that'll prevent it from being tabbed, I think. Let's test it.
So like theoretically, if you had like a hidden field, hidden input, and you put a tab index of -1, or like if you didn't have a tab index of -1, would it still have a tab index? You know what I mean?
Yeah, so for HTML elements, it's a different story. If you are making your own custom element, which does happen a lot, like that's why I'm kind of sharing it. You will need to do that if you want it to be like grayed out or disabled or something. But actually, like I'm trying to think, button, like for the button element, the HTML button element. Sorry, I gotta close it. It actually has a property called disabled. Yeah, disabled. And that HTML will take care of setting the -1 tab index for you, so you don't have to worry about that. So in general, like you won't be dealing with tab index unless you're making like a weird component or something. But honestly, like from my experience so far, it's like I've had to use this about twice for making components that were almost exactly like HTML components, but they wanted to have it just a little bit different, that I couldn't style it like that. I had to make an actual new component. So yeah, I think that answers your question. Anybody else? Hit me with them. Like, give me hard ones. Like, embarrass me.
What about like ARIA tags? I know ARIA is a huge aspect. How
All right.
do we interact with ARIA tags?
So let's flip on over to here. I actually thought about this, but I was like, yeah. Thank you, Seamus. Good setup. So if you're ever like, oh, I want to make this like accessible, and like, what pathway do I actually do this? So the first thing you should be looking for is HTML elements. There's tons of HTML elements, more than you imagine, for just common stuff. Like as I showed you, like the address tag, for everything really. So you should be going to those first because they have all the automatic behavior that just makes it very easy to use and for screen readers to pick up on, and they'll know how to do it. If you don't have like a native HTML element for what you're trying to build, like one in particular that I see a lot is for a tab panel. Like if you ever have like a panel and you have like multiple tabs that change the content in that one panel, there's not actually a native HTML element for that. So what you then move on to is the role attributes. And this is technically part of ARIA, but it's technically part of it, but you kind of just use this one role attribute. As you can see down here, this is actually the tab panel I was telling you about. Use role and tab list. Like it has a bunch of these names for common components that you'll see a lot, but just aren't in HTML. And just read up on the component, like on Mozilla Developer Network. They will have more information on this, and it'll tell you which roles to use and which ones you can use together. Like tab lists, you have to have tabs, otherwise it's not going to work. And then moving on to ARIA attributes. So ARIA attributes are incredibly important. They're actually what power the role attribute and HTML elements underneath the hood. They're kind of like the most bare bones you can get for accessibility on the internet. However, with that in mind, they are so bare bones and so like technical that it's actually not recommended to use any of the any of the attributes that have ARIA dash whatever. Like as you can see, ARIA pressed equals false here. I'm actually not sure what that one does. ARIA hidden, I know, makes any element that normally would be displayed to a screen reader, it completely hides it, which I would say that that is probably the only one that I use in particular. And I wouldn't use too many more than that. And the reason for that is because you see on a lot of sites that the ones who are making use of a lot of ARIA stuff, ARIA attributes, they aren't doing it for lack of a better term, right. Like they're not doing it in a way that makes sense that they're supposed to be used. If you are going to use this, like developers do use these for developing applications, even outside of web applications too. It expands to really any application suite like Android, iOS, all that kind of stuff. If they are going to use it, you have to read the documentation, like really read it. Like you won't be reading like Mozilla network kind of stuff. You're going to have to be reading the actual like spec if you're going to be, guaranteeing that you're using it right. So yeah, that's kind of the pathway of like how, if you want to make your HTML more accessible and likewise your site, start from the HTML elements. If the HTML elements have what you're looking for and it describes it pretty well, stick with that. If not, the role attributes, there's probably a role for the component that you're trying to make. And if it's super necessary, or if you do need to absolutely hide something specifically to a screen reader and not to a sighted user, then you can use an ARIA attribute like ARIA hidden. But again, it's not recommended. There's other ways to go, like CSS display none. Actually, that is a good replacement for ARIA hidden. But yeah, that's kind of the rundown for ARIA attributes. They're great if you don't use them. So yeah, any more questions? Hit me with them. You're coming up with some good ones, actually.
Do you know of any speech software that can perform tasks in your computer, or like even in VS Code?
In VS Code, so yes. So actually, the software that we downloaded, NVDA, it's actually not just for the web. It's for any application. And doing research on this, actually, I ran into some Microsoft stuff, some Microsoft videos, actually. And I didn't realize this, but Microsoft builds accessibility into a lot of their products. And what's even more interesting, actually, is, I don't know if you know this, but VS Code is actually an Electron app. You guys know what Electron is, right? Yeah. So it's under the hood, it's actually running a web page. So they've actually been able to make the editor 100%, or I shouldn't say 100%, because there's always going to be bugs, but they've been able to make the VS Code application very, very accessible for those who don't have vision. And they've implemented it in the ways that you would with actually any website, basically. Just using HTML elements, role attributes, and probably a ton of ARIA attributes because they have a lot of custom functionality in there. So yeah, that any major screen reader should be able to handle VS Code. All right. Any more questions?
I have a difficult question for you.
Oh, let's do it. This is the big one.
So, some websites have very animated features on them, like such as the background or text or titles or sidebars that come in and out depending on where your mouse is. Mm-hmm. Is there any good ways to deal with accessibility for those, or is that just a lost cause?
I wouldn't call it a lost cause. It does definitely make it harder when the content is invisible and then becomes visible after the page loads. But I think there's two ways I would tackle that. One, keeping the content, like say for your example, you have like a sidebar to this. Actually, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen here so you can see my hands. So you have a sidebar on the side that's invisible. Instead of making it like, if you want it to just slide in, instead of making it invisible, then display, block, and then animate in, if you were to have the content still there off the page, the screen reader still can access it. Another thing actually that you can do, which is probably a better way, but you can't always use it, prefers reduced motion. So in CSS, okay, yeah, in CSS, just like we use the screen media queries and I don't know, I think we mostly just use screen media queries. They also have a media query for something called prefers reduced motion. And this is something that gets set by the browser or by software that's on the computer. And basically what it says is, oh, this user, for whatever reason, they don't want any animation. They don't want any fun and games. Just load the web page. Don't do any weird stuff. So this is a really good solution for this if and only if you're using CSS animations. So it sort of solves it. Like most simple animations on your page are going to be just CSS animations, unless you're using jQuery for the animation that uses JavaScript. But for the most part, that solves the problem. If you want to do any more complicated stuff and you are using JavaScript or jQuery, I'm going to be honest, I don't have an answer for that. There could be a solution to that. There probably is, but to my best knowledge, this is probably the best hack, or it's not a hack, but the best solution to it. But yeah.
Okay.
All right. Any more?
As sort of a follow-up to Sam's question,
Yeah.
like as the web kind of moves toward these really like visually active sites, is there a situation where we could have like sites that like would recognize if the computer is in accessibility mode or something, and then they just serve up like a for visually impaired people, especially like sort of a different version of the site that's just optimized for the reader? Like I know that segregation is bad, and that's kind of a bad train to go down, but just in terms of like making it easier for people, do you think that would ever be something that the web would do? Like,
I mean, I like what you're saying. I don't think it's bad to be segregationalist. I think tailoring content for different groups of people is honestly great. I think it's 100% possible. I don't think it's likely though, solely because honestly, in the industry right now, there's not a lot of importance put on accessibility, unfortunately. There's a lot of people that are like they kind of like put that as like a nice thing to do, but honestly, most projects that I've heard about, accessibility is always like the last thing that gets cut or last thing that gets thought about, or if it does get thought about, it's only because the government, like there's a law that the government says that, oh, you're like a formal organization, you have to build an accessible website. So I could see it being a thing, but I don't see it likely just because of company priorities at the moment. It could change, and I would like to see it change, because serving something up that's 100% accessible would be beautiful. That is a perfect future, but unfortunately, we're going to have to do the best that we can to, when we build our websites, build it so that our content is defined as best as possible, that it works, good enough for people with screen readers.
Yeah, the reason I asked is because like I feel like we're gonna reach a tipping point here where web design is like this hurricane of visual elements most of the time, and then it's almost like a law of diminishing returns trying to turn that into something that's also accessible, where it'd be faster
Yeah.
just to like build a readable document that can be served instead. That's
Yeah.
actually like, but I don't know.
No,
I don't know
no,
if we're there yet.
that's a valid opinion. I think in a lot of ways the web is getting way more visually complicated, as you're saying. I think so as technology evolves, there's more and more ways to write these kind of visual things. Like a lot of sites will use HTML canvas now to render a lot of stuff because they can do incredible visuals on it. That is 100% inaccessible. So as we go on, we're going to face even more and more challenges. But honestly, it does look reassuring. One from government policies, because more government policies are coming out where you have to meet this requirement for accessibility, and that's getting better on that end. But also, just HTML5 in itself is like, I want to say like a 10,000-fold improvement to what it was before we had HTML5, where Flash was the main thing. Flash, like, there's no accessibility at all. Like, sites that were built with Flash, it's like, good luck trying to navigate through it. It's like, you might be able to click a button, but you're not getting any information from that page. So yeah,
I remember it actually had alt attributes in it. So when you added stuff to your stage in Flash, you could actually add an alt attribute,
okay.
kind of like a similar thing.
Okay.
But that was it. Like
that was it.
The reader would have been ridiculous. It just would have like gone through all the different stuff on the screen and just read through those words. Like it wouldn't really have helped at all. So
that actually makes sense too, because I'm kind of thinking, because one of the first things for accessibility that I learned, and I think that everybody gets drilled into them, is every image needs to have an alt tag. And like, I feel like that's where it came from, is like a time even before HTML.
The bare minimum, right? For a time, that was the bare minimum. But there's technologies now and so many more processes and protocols that you should follow. So it's cool.
Yeah. All right. I will keep on asking for questions if anybody's got it. Good. All right. So I think we're good to move on to the chat.